Hello, I'm Curt Doolittle from the Natural Law Institute. This is my good friend and author Luke Weinhagen, and we are going through his chapter by chapter to his bit of wisdom here, which was going to hold up in front of us and show us, which is the Primal Primer. I was at some friend's house this weekend, and I happened to find the Primal Primer on the bookshelf. And I was like, you know who Luke Weinhagen is. And so we're able to discuss that a bit. So we're going through chapter by chapter. Well, Luke, what is this? What's the context for the chapter we're bringing about today? We're going to talk about today.
So today we're talking about chapter 7, which is all about water.
Now, why do we? What do you? What's the? How does water? I mean, we have a theme to your work, right? And water is the next chapter. So just tell us what the theme is, and then the sequence of just the sequence of topics we've covered so far. Sure. This is going to be. It's going to turn out to the. Was it that? What's that Christmas Carol? The 12 Days of Christmas. You got to remember which chapter is the partridge in a pear tree or something like that.
We're on the seventh. We're on the seventh day. The seventh day of So. The argument that I make, that the hypothesis that I offer in the book and in my work, is that there is a minimum set of skills that are required to achieve the state of being a fully developed, fully mature human being. I call that set of skills core human competence.
Right.
The reason we want to have those skills developed is so that we're not in a state of dependence for those life-sustaining aspects, right? The food, water, shelter, safety, security, right? Those animal level needs, right? We're not dependent on others for those animal level needs. The reason that's important is because when we're in a dependent state for those needs, our compliance can be manipulated by controlling our access to those needs. We become very vulnerable to being pressured into going along with things simply because of that state of dependence. Right. So that the bigger or the more dependent we are, the less opportunity we have to actually be involved in cooperation. Right. If somebody says, do this thing, or I'm going to take away your food, you don't have a choice about whether or not you do that thing if you have no other way to get food. Same thing is true for water. If they say, do this thing, or I'm going to take away your access to water, if you don't know how to get water yourself, you're not in a position of cooperation in that interaction. You're a victim of compulsion. Yeah, you're a victim. That's actually, you're not in a state of cooperation, you're in a state of force in that situation.
So you try to make this point consistently, which I thought was, I think a lot of the sophistication which you try to achieve through subtlety is fascinating to me. And so the idea that if you can't be mindful, right? In other words, you can't feel like you're in a state of self-control in the world unless you understand what are the basic requirements to survive as a human being, and how complexity is built up from there. And if you do understand those things, you not only have mindfulness, but it's very hard to make you a victim.
Yes. Yeah. And I also connect that to some of the broad dysfunctions that we're seeing in the world right now. Things like, anxiety being the number one mental health issue across the West, right? When you are in that perpetual state of victimization because of your dependence, that's a overriding sense of anxiety that just is always there. It may not be very high grade. It's a low trickle.
You may not know why you're anxious.
Right. But exactly, you have no access to even addressing it because you don't know what the cause is. And the cause is the state of dependence that's undermining your ability to navigate the world as it is, right? You're vulnerable to every interaction because you're incapable of provisioning your own animal level, basic level needs. And when I talk about needs, I reference a lot the Maslow's hierarchy of needs. It's those bottom two levels that I focus on. The physiological needs are those bottom two levels, and that's the food, water.
Because you can't be mindful up in those levels unless you're mindful at that level. I mean,
effectively, what we've done is we've taken Maslow's hierarchy, which is a triangle shape, a very solid foundation, and we've turned it into a diamond shape by abandoning the competencies needed to perform those bottom two layers on our own behalf. Right, so we're dependent on others for that. So our diamond, our shape, our hierarchy is a diamond shape, and we're asking for external support to hold it up. right? So we're always at risk of falling down. And so that's what I'm trying to address with the materials. I'm trying to rebuild that foundation for people so that they can engage with each other in cooperation, not in just compliance or going along because your needs depend on your compliance, right? I want your needs to depend on you so that your engagements with others are value-based, so that they are cooperation again. So that's why we're talking about water.
You snuck that summary up on me a little fast there. Like, what? Oh, yeah. Okay. Yes. That's what. So we've covered cordage.
Yeah.
We've called what do you call awareness?
Situational awareness, the basics of situational awareness, which is the ability to create a baseline so that you can identify anomalies.
Right. So anomalies and baseline anomalies, cordage. What's the next one?
Shelter after that.
Shelter. And then the next one is.
Then we had the disrupted environment, which is how we start to observe what anomalies start to look like in our environment, and then how do we identify resources in our environment.
Okay, and then what's next?
Now we're on chapter 7, which is water. The first two conversations were the introduction to the material and the argument for the material. Right. So that's how.
So this is just an obvious question, right? So I'm just going to answer it for the audience in anticipation. It is well, why didn't you just do awareness thing with it and then why insert it among these basic skills? In other words, why not address just awareness first and then the basic skills, or the way around? The basic skills, then why toggle between the two subjects?
Yeah, and it's a good question. One of the reasons, situational awareness, I think, is the key to all of the material that I'm talking about here. You can't address any issue until you're aware of it. Right. So building the skill and reinforcing the skill throughout the material of how do I stay engaged enough in my surroundings that I'm aware of what's going on in them, for threat assessment, resource identification, just being able to leverage opportunities that your environments present themselves, right? It's just a fundamental skill to human interaction.
Yes.
Right. And so I want that to be the core of the message that I hang everything off of, because that's the real essential piece. That's how we learn to navigate our environments, is through that situational awareness piece. Then the core human competency stuff comes in because of that vulnerability, right? So I'm addressing the more obvious risks and how to navigate the more obvious risks with the seen risks with the situational awareness training. I'm addressing all the unseen risks and vulnerabilities with the core human competence training. And so that's why I'm bouncing back and forth between them, is because I'm trying to reinforce both the seen and the unseen throughout the entire set of material. Right? Like, people are just not aware of their own dependence right now. They can comprehend and they can understand, being situationally aware makes me safer in an environment, but they're really not seeing how they're currently accessing water creates a vulnerability for them, They just take it for granted in a way that they don't with the active situational awareness stuff. Right. So I'm trying to move back and forth between them so that it's always on the radar.
That's the real answer. You're trying to make sure that by discussing each topic, each practical topic in the sequence, you're maintaining the core purpose alongside it. Right.
Yeah. And these are not separate topics.
Right. And so that's why you're alternating. Anyway, so I just wanted to pull that up just in case somebody asked. I know I thought it, right? So I mean, I assume somebody else.
The other side of this is the other thing I'm trying to create. It's a conceptual shift I'm trying to help people achieve here. A lot of people look at the fieldcraft stuff as survival training, as something extra in addition to our normal existence. It's not. These are human skills.
Right.
These are skills that all of our ancestors learned how to do just through daily life. And it's only very recently that we've abandoned them and created this series of dependence for their execution, for their provision. So these are not extraneous. These are not the vestigial tail skills, right? These are essential human skills that we have to have, whether we're competent with them or not. Somebody has to be providing them all the time. We don't get to exist.
It's like the people who forget, like during the pandemic, we had people become painfully aware of how important truck drivers, shelf stockers are, right?
Yeah.
Right. And I was like, to me, that's obvious. but I guess that's obvious because I grew up when you still did that stuff,
Right.
right? I mean, that was like part of being young, right? You got the shelf stocker job, and I had to deliver flowers, right? I mean, when I was in my teens, right, deliver flowers and plants. So if you've done those jobs, then you're aware of them. But if you don't take them if you take them for granted, you don't realize how hard it is to get a loaf of bread on your shelf. Is quite a bit of work. You'd think that eggs would be an easy thing, but it's not. And if you ever see how hard it is to make poultry or beef or pork or whatever, there's a lot of hands in there
Right.
making that all happen at an absurdly low price. Right. And it's like it's funny when we laugh about the fact that toilet paper is an actually pretty easy thing to make, but people have a nervous breakdown if they think they're going to run out of toilet paper.
Yes.
I love this example because it's one thing to run out of water, sure, you can understand, but you're running out of toilet paper. I mean, that for the average person, that's a terrorism, right? Anyway, sorry, I just had to run with see if I could run with an analogy to say, well, there's a lot of things we're becoming numb about, and Luke's trying to drag us down and say, let's understand that if you don't understand these basic things, you're a victim because you're dependent upon a hierarchy of complexity that you don't know how to accommodate for.
Right.
And the mindfulness you get out of knowing those things how to accommodate for lets you tolerate those problems that do occur when they do.
Yeah.
Did I sell your pitch there, boss?
No, that's exactly.
I just want to see if I did it. I did a good sales pitch.
You did a great sales pitch. Yeah. And there's the negative, right? We don't want to be that victim. And then there's a positive. We want to be capable of engaging in cooperation. So we want to be hitting both the positive and the negative as we acquire this competence or reacquire this competence that we should have just gotten through living our life and through exposure to the world, like our ancestors always did. So that's what we're working on. That's what we're rebuilding. That's why I'm going through the material that I'm going through is to try to reclaim what it means to be human from a competence point of view, competence perspective. So that's where we're at. That's why we're talking about water today.
All right. So chapter 7, water, find it, filter it. And the best part of this title, don't die.
No, it's the important part, right?
So
I actually had a personal experience with being in a state of a life-threatening dehydration, right? I had a surgery when I was in high school. It was an appendectomy. And for whatever reason, when they put me back together, my intestines got crimped. And so I couldn't pass anything. I couldn't keep anything down. I couldn't keep any food down, and I couldn't keep any water down. And I went 3-4 days without being able to drink water at all. And that's about how long you get before your body starts to break down from lack of water, right? It's that 3-day mark in general. So I ended up back in the hospital because of it. And I was so dehydrated because of going through that experience that the normal nurse couldn't find a vein to get
oh my God, that's horrible. Yes.
That's how dehydrated I was. So they had to bring in a medical student that had been practicing on cadavers to find a vein to get an IV started so that
right
rehydrated. So that, I was in a really extreme state of dehydration by that point. I think that was about 5 days in to not being able to swallow water, to not being able to not vomit back up any water that I consumed. So it was extraordinarily painful. It was a very terrifying experience to be in that state, even in the hospital when, I've been poked 24 times now because they're trying to find a vein to use. And I've got the medical staff here going, we don't know what to do to get water back into this person. So it was a very, it was a very scary experience from that point of view. Right. But just the experience of it, right. It really very, very quickly just taps you. It saps your strength out. It destroys your energy levels being without water. It's so essential to our existence, right? And we take it such for granted. I don't anymore because of that experience, but so many of us, we take it so for granted that it's just always going to be there. Mm-hmm. That we don't even think about what do we do when it's not. And that's kind of where I start this chapter is thirst is a dehydration signal. People think that thirst is normal, but thirst is actually the first signal that your body's already in the process of becoming dehydrated. Right? Ideally, you never even feel thirsty because you're consuming water on a regular enough basis. Right. So what I try to do in this chapter is we learn how to respond to that thirst signal. It's funny. I for the audience, if they don't know this, I was in the Marines, right? So I went through Marine Corps boot camp, and they had pee charts on the walls whenever you were in the bathroom, right? And so you could tell by the color of your urine how dehydrated you were. You want your urine to be clear, ideally, right? That's what you're aiming for. And so it was all throughout training was this huge thing. We're constantly evaluating the state of our dehydration, and we're consuming water like crazy to maintain the state of hydration. But we're constantly looking at our pee to see how dehydrated or not we are at any given time when we're in service. So I've had a lot of exposure to thirst dynamics. so a lot of that goes into writing this particular chapter. So after the introduction, the first section of the chapter goes into finding water, and I introduce a topic or a concept that people are probably aware of, but they don't think about much. And it's this feature, this land feature called the riparian zone. And what a riparian zone is the area near a water source where the more water dependent plants grow. So it's a visible distinction in any given area where you can see these areas. You can see where water exists by looking at the change in vegetation, because the more water dependent plants are going to grow near the water. And so that creates what's called a riparian zone, right? And so learning how to recognize a riparian zone is actually one of the more efficient ways to reliably find a water source in the wild, right? Not outside of your kitchen, right? The caution there, the concern there, the worry there is that we've done a lot of things to create artificial riparian zones, a lot of parks and a lot of golf courses and things like that. We've created a lot of artificial riparian zones, which aren't actual riparian zones because it's all piped in water. So
yes, of course.
It's still, you're still in the dependence.
Yeah, but they're pretty.
They are pretty. But I just want to make sure that people recognize that there's a difference. They don't find a riparian zone and then build the golf course there, right? they pump it in to create the look of the riparian zone. Same thing with the city parks and stuff like that, right? So there is a distinction. What we're looking for is the natural formation where you see the plants surrounding what looks like a riparian zone, where they're kind of undulating and it looks like they're following the path of a water flow, right? So that it's not going to be in straight grids and lines like it is in the inner city parks and the golf courses and stuff like that. So there's I just want to make sure that distinction exists.
There's a place. So I'm sorry, I got to interject the humor. But there's plenty of places in the world where we create our own riparian zones by drilling holes and then tapping into groundwater pipes that the government provides. And in a lot of the world, they do this with gasoline and liquefied natural gas.
Yeah.
And then bad things happen sometimes. Yes. They go boom.
Yeah.
So we don't want to advise those.
Right. Exactly.
And that's an unnatural zone.
Right. And now the other thing is, though, these riparian zones, you can find them anywhere water has ever existed, right? You'll find riparian zones in any part of the world. So even deserts, you're going to end up finding riparian zones. You're going to see areas where there looks like there's vegetation growing compared to the entire rest of the space you're looking at, and there's none. And that's going to be it may be very small, but that's going to be your riparian zone for that area, right? That's going to be where those plants have found water enough to survive. Right. That's kind of what we're looking for. So you can pretty much always find. I don't think you're going to find any undercurrent conditions in Antarctica, because I don't think there's a lot of groundwater going on there. But otherwise, you're going to find riparian zones pretty much.
Although if you ask guys who dig wells, it's kind of surprising how predictable these things are.
Yes. Yeah. But yeah, a lot of the stuff's really predictable, and it's really our lack of awareness of it that has made it hard to find, rather than it actually being hard to find. We just don't ever learn how to look for it anymore. We don't even learn what to look for, right? And that's one of the reasons I'm bringing some of even the term riparian zone. Most people don't know that, they aren't familiar with that term, right? It's just a vocabulary word that means the area where the plants grow, where the water-based plants grow. So that's the first thing we want to look for when we're talking about sourcing our own water. Then there's a couple different things that we're looking for. We're looking at, there's terrain and surface water, and then there's groundwater. So the terrain and surface water is all the water that you can see, right? So anything that's on the surface is surface water. It's all terrain based water. I've talked in previous chapters about how humans share that core set of needs, that first two level of needs. We share that with all other complex organisms, right? All the animals in our environment have those same needs, right? So
Yep.
one of the things about surface water that could be helpful when you're trying to identify and locate it is all the game trails are all going to lead to that surface water. They're all going to converge on the water source because all of those animals need water as well. So in addition to looking for the riparian zones, we can start looking for, like we've talked about in previous chapters, we can start looking for and identifying game trails to help us find a water source, right? Because unlike us, the animals have continued to learn how to source their own water.
Mm-hmm.
So that's another resource available to you for finding water in an environment, right? Just follow the animal trails to the water source.
I'm just looking at the USGS depth by, because it's a huge database, right?
Yep.
It's all over the place.
Yes.
From like 3 feet to 1,000 feet.
Yeah.
It looks like the average is 300 to 500, but there's an awful lot at just 30. Wow.
Yeah.
So it wasn't that hard to dig old-fashioned wells.
No.
Because if you can find, you can get down 30 feet and find water. Okay, so it's not. Okay, thank you. I learned something again today from you.
Yeah, and that's true of most places, right? So, and that's important to know, right? The next thing I was going to jump into here is water follows gravity, right? Water flows downhill, right? It's a pretty commonly accepted idea, right? We're all familiar with the fact that water flows downhill. So the lower you go, the closer to the surface water is going to get, right? So
like Wisconsin is 2 to 3 feet.
Yeah.
Holy crap.
Yeah, the water table is very high in the
Wyoming's 447 feet.
Yeah.
All right, sorry. I thought that was really fascinating.
Yep.
So the point you're trying to make is that, well, yeah, sure, but that's like on average for a reason. Within that area, we probably can find some water that's accessible.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So you want to find your riparian zones, you want to follow animal trails, and then you want to go downhill. You want to go lower. The lower you can go, the better, because that's where water's going to pool if it's terrain and surface water. And if it's groundwater, that's also where you're going to find the water table closest to the surface, is the lower you can get in elevation, right? Just because water flows downhill. One of the big lessons I provide in this chapter is just the idea and how to do a seepage pit. A seepage pit is exactly what it sounds like. You dig a hole and you wait for the water to seep in to that hole, right? And so that's what we're talking about with a seepage pit, right? So if you can find a riparian zone, you can follow the game trails to what looks to be like a good candidate for a water source. You're finding some surface growing plants like mosses and stuff like that indicates that water's nearby, but you're not seeing anything on the surface. Then you can start to dig. You can dig a hole. Really just dig a hole with your hands, with a stick, whatever you can use or find. You start digging a hole, and what you're looking for is the ground to get wetter and wetter as you dig deeper and deeper. If it's not doing that, then you're not in a good spot to find water, right? So you keep making some just shallow holes to find where that is going to start to happen. Then you start
wetness is good.
What's that? Yeah, wetness is good. You want to find a wet hole. Keep digging until you do. Now the next part gets even better, right? So a good seepage pit means you can get your whole arm in there.
Sorry, apologize. Just couldn't stop myself. Anyway, so how I'm trying to get a grasp on this while you're talking.
Yeah.
It depends on the area you're saying, but don't most of us live near water?
Yeah, most of the human population for most of human history has congregated near water.
So if you're talking about being stressed, you're not talking about being like lost in. You're not talking about crisis survival, like being lost in Antarctica or something. Because you could just melt the.
Yes, yeah, exactly.
What you're talking about is that if anything really, really bad happens, it's not like water's unavailable or it's even impossible, right? It's problem.
The difficulty in sourcing water is entirely because of your competence, not because of its availability.
I mean, like there's a stream, right? I mean,
Yes.
I don't even have to throw the rock far.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
which to me, it just reinforces how what a mistake it is for us to become dependent because of access to water.
Right.
Right. I mean, it's just such a
It might be if you're a farmer trying to water fields, but to stay alive, no.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And even the farmer, our ancestors were farming for a long time, and they didn't have city water for a lot of that period. Well, yeah, so that's exactly the case, right? And again, just to reiterate, just to reinforce here, I am not talking about the strange rescue situation, the survival situation. Those are important, but again, these are human skills. These are not survival skills. The survivalist practices these skills, but these are just human skills. These aren't some extraordinary thing that just a rare few people learn how to do, right? This is not Navy SEAL stuff. This is next door neighbor stuff that we all ought to be knowing.
For some reason, I really like knowing this one. I don't know why. It's so obvious, and it should have been. You know what I mean? The importance of water, the availability of water, and you think about it, and like realistically, you need a gallon every so often, right? I mean, so it's not really that big a deal. And then I think you cover filtering next, right?
Yep. Yeah. So after we talk about how to find it, how to source it, then we talk about how to filter it and how to treat it. Right? And so nature does a pretty good job of filtering water in most cases, but depending
can I interject here?
Yeah.
I used to live on the raging river in Falls City, Washington. I had 10,000 gallon tank, right? You know why you need a $10,000 tank? So the silt can
exactly. Yeah. We're going to talk about that as well. So,
and it doesn't taste good. It just doesn't taste good.
No. Well, like I said, like I was getting at, nature does a fair job of filtering water, but depending on your area, it could be pulling sediment in that's unpleasant or even toxic to you.
Organic, right?
Yeah. Or it could, you could be in an area where our efforts, man's influence on the watershed is causing some problems with the water, right? And so we want to be at least capable of filtering it and purifying it. And those are two different things, right? Filtering it is moving out physical particulate from it, right? Whereas purifying it is killing any organisms that are in the water, right? So those are the two different concepts there. So the first part I get into, or the next section I get into, how to build a 3-part water filter, right? And this is kind of like the standard water filter all around the world. It's what emerging communities build to filter their community water supplies and things like that. And it's just your big filter, which is your rocks and stones and pebbles and stuff like that. It's your small physical filter, which is your sand, the finer sand, the better. And it's your charcoal filter, right? That's your 3-part filter, right?
What? Give me them again.
So it's rocks, sand, stones, sands, and charcoal.
And what's the order you put them in?
So charcoal is going to be at the bottom. It's your final filter stage, right? It's what's going to take out. It's the most likely to remove any kind of chemical impurity, and it's going to remove the finest, whatever remaining out of the previous 2 filters, the finest bits that are remaining from the previous 2 filters. Above that, you're going to have your sand as fine as possible, and that's truly what you're trying to do with the sand is remove solid objects.
Particulates,
you're trying to get actual particulate out of the water. And the same thing with the rocks. The rocks are just going to move the bigger chunks of particulate. Then you get down to the smaller chunks of particulate. Then you get to the charcoal, which actually starts filtering the water itself, right? So and that's why we use a 3-part filter.
My filters were always these. It's just cloth, really.
Yeah. And that's one of the big things I try to reinforce in this section of the book is you want to think creatively. Like one of the examples I use in the book is, if you can find any kind of vessel that holds water, you can use your shirt or any other cloth you have and layer it over the top of the vessel, one stage at a time. So you put your shirt on there with some rocks and you filter your water through. Then the water's in the vessel, right? You take your shirt off, shake it out. You do the same thing with another vessel. You put the shirt on, put some sand on, and you take the water that you just rock filtered and you sand filter it, right? And you just keep going back and forth with your 3 parts of your filter, and you're going to end up with water that's been filtered effectively through a 3-part filter. You can build all of these 3 parts in a single article of clothing. One of the things I talk about in the book is the sock filter, right? You take a sock and you put crushed up charcoal at the bottom of it. You put sand on top of the crushed up charcoal. You put pebbles and stones on top of the the sand, and you've got a 3-part filter built in a sock, right? And as you pour water through, you're not going to drink the stuff that comes off right away. You're going to let the sock swell so that the pores start closing up a little bit, and it forces the water down through the filter part of the sock, right? And then
you need more charcoal than you think, though. It's not like you only need an inch of it or something.
No, you want to fill it with charcoal. You want to go nuts with the charcoal if you can. So the charcoal is the most important part. Everything else is just preparing the water for the charcoal.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So
it tastes much better after charcoal.
Yeah. So because of that, the next section actually, I get into how to make charcoal. Right. People that might not know what charcoal is. Charcoal is not burnt wood. That's ash. Charcoal is cooked wood, where all the moisture and all the gas has been cooked out of the organic matter. Right. So it doesn't just have to be wood, but any organic matter that you can cook to the point where all the moisture and all the gas has been removed from it, that becomes charcoal. And you can crush it up and use it as a filtration device. There's also the distinction between ash and charcoal. There's an old an old saying, an old rule of thumb, where if you're having digestive issues, right, you want to use white if you're tight. So you're going to add some ash to your water if you're having a hard time processing waste, and you want to use black if you're loose, right? So if you have diarrhea, then you're going to add some charcoal to your water. So
that's old.
Yeah,
that's ancient wisdom.
But it's white if you're tight, black if you're loose, right? Just keep that one in mind. And if you get sick out there, that'll help you. Whether you're adding ash or charcoal to your water. But the important thing here is the distinction between ash being burnt wood and charcoal being cooked wood. Right. That's why
it used to be a heck of an industry, right? Making charcoal.
Yeah, it is. I've actually got a family member of mine. He's a metal worker, and I've got him making me a charcoal container, a steel charcoal tube, so that I can just toss that on top of my fire, and it'll cook the charcoal inside of it. It'll cook the wood and turn it into charcoal inside of it, so I can source my own charcoal out of anything I want whenever I need to. But that's the distinction. That's the important distinction.
That's cool.
Yeah. Another thing, just going back to the seepage pit that we were talking about before, the seepage pit, you can use that also as a filter. If you need to, if you're in a situation where you need to filter water and you don't have a vessel to use, you make a pit. The seepage pit itself will act as a filter. Let's say you find a stagnant pond and you don't want to drink, you don't want to drink out of the stagnant pond, right? You just don't. So what you can do is 10 feet off the shoreline from the pond, dig yourself a seepage pit. Then the ground itself will act as a filter, and the water will seep into your seepage pit from the pond, filtering out all of the particulate, all the stuff that's in that stagnant pond that you don't want to be consuming. Right?
I remember my well guy treating me like I was a moron because I didn't understand that.
Right. Yeah.
What are you, stupid? The earth does it for you.
Right. Yeah. Exactly.
Huh?
Well, it's surprising how few of us are familiar with a lot of these processes that are essential to our survival, right? And so again, that's one of the things I'm trying to solve. The same thing, one of the things I find fascinating, you can use that same concept for salt water. If you're near the ocean and you find yourself in a need of finding water, you can use the sand itself to filter the salt out, right? You want to get back behind the first layer of dunes so that the sand's packed enough, and start digging yourself your seepage pit, and the water that filters in there is going to be, it's not going to be completely purified, right? You're still going to have some salt in there, but a lot of the salt that's in the salt water is going to be removed from the water that ends up in that seepage pit, just because it has to pass through so much sand, and the sand is under pressure from the dunes and things like that. So
actually, there was something I thought was really interesting. I didn't have to have a pump on my water supply. Right. Just by digging the hole, the nature produced enough pressure that we had to turn it down, right? And we had to regulate the pressure coming out of the hole.
Yeah.
Isn't that weird? That's still weird to me.
It's great.
I mean, like, you just think that, except that, my family has a house on Crystal Lake here in middle of Connecticut. And it's a spring-fed lake. And the force that the water comes out of the springs from, it's amazing to me.
Yeah. It's like Lake Jacuzzi.
I mean, they're big, right?
Right. Yeah.
It's not like this little thing, right? We did that in Washington State, where like, come see this spring, and it's like this little set of bubbles, and I'm like, I grew up on a lake where that thing can push you over, right?
Yeah, exactly. So then after I go into making charcoal, I do discuss how to purify water. Uh, the big thing obviously is boiling it.
Yep.
Right? If you can boil water, that's best. I've looked at a bunch of different research, and people think the longer you boil it, better. Really, after 10 minutes, anything that was living in that water will be dead.
Yes.
You can get a little bit less if you're in a higher elevation, but if you boil the water for 10 minutes, that's all the more you need. And it's funny, in the past, there were things like, beer was very common, and people were using beer as their main source of water, and they weren't having any problems with the water, because that beer gets, or the water that's used to make beer is filtered and purified before it's made beer. But people weren't putting it together that was a thing, right? So people that weren't drinking
Also
beer were getting
alcohol,
sick.
right? I
Right.
mean,
Yeah.
if it's fermented enough to kill the bacteria that makes the alcohol, it's fermented. There's enough alcohol to kill almost everything else.
Right. One of the stories that I use in the book is about the old railroads, right? Dysentery would fly through the railroad camps, right? People would be getting sick and sick and sick, except for the Chinese guys. They wouldn't get the dysentery, and everybody thought that they were the ones poisoning the water supply. But what was really happening was they were boiling their water to make tea. They were the only ones in the camp boiling their water, because they were boiling their water to make tea. So they were killing all of the organisms in the water.
Yeah.
So they weren't getting dysentery, right? But everybody else was, right? So it just goes to show that we've been doing this for a long time, even when we're not necessarily been aware of it, right?
Yeah. Every time we do one of these episodes, I leave it thinking, man, we've gone really wrong.
I'm trying to fix it. I'm trying to get us back on track. So,
well, it's like, I'm like, well, the Boy Scout, the stuff we learned in Boy Scouts, it shouldn't be optional.
right. Yeah. And a lot of what I'm doing, right, is basically, it's Boy Scouts with bullets and bad guys.
Yes.
We got to take account for the bad people too, not just the environments that we're in. So that sums up well what I'm aiming myself at here. I do talk a little bit in this section about purifying water, about chemical purifying and mechanical purifying. Things like, you got things like the Life Straw out there, which is effectively just a 3-part filter, right, that you can buy in a plastic tube. That's what the Life Straw is. But then they have things like chlorine tablets and iodine tablets and stuff that you can use, chemical water filters and stuff like that that you can buy as part of survival kits. The big thing about that is you're still then limited to having access to that as a resource, right? That's why I lean more towards develop the skill. The tools are great. Have the tools on hand if you can, but don't rely on the tool. Develop the skill, develop the competency, right? We want to recreate survival as a human asset, not just as a thing that's available if we can acquire the tools to make it possible, right? So that's why I lean more towards skill.
Can we just briefly cover what it takes to make charcoal?
Sure. Yeah. So you can find you can use any kind of wood, right? So any wood you can find, and what you want to do, you want to cook it. What that means is you have to keep the flame away from it. Right. So traditionally, what they would do is they would make a pile, like a teepee pile of wood, and then they would cover that whole thing with mud. Right. And then they leave a hole in the middle and a few holes on the side, and then they dig a hole into the middle of the pile, and that's where they would light the flame. Right. So it would be there'd be a heat source, there'd be a flame in there, and some of the wood would get burnt by that. But because the mud was controlling the airflow to the flame, it would never get big. The flame would never get big, right? So instead of burning all the wood that was in the pile, it would cook all the wood that's in the pile.
Mm-hmm.
So if you don't have something like a charcoal maker like I'm having built, you can do this just using mud over a pile of wood, right?
So, but I mean, you can literally take a soda pop can, cut the top off, poke some holes in the bottom of it, take basically sticks, right? Fill this thing with sticks and stick it in the middle of your fire somewhere.
Exactly.
Right? And you'll get enough to filter water from, right? And it's not like we have to industrialize it.
No, not at all. And another thing that people use frequently or are familiar with, it's char cloth, right? Which is charcoal cloth, right? It's just charred cloth. The way you make that, the way I make it, I have like an old Altoids tin, right? You just take a nail and poke a hole in the top of it, and then you can put any organic cloth in there into that tin, close it, put that on the fire, and let it cook, not burn, but
3 to 5 hours or something like that.
And then you're gonna have char cloth, You're gonna have cloth that is turned into charcoal. You're gonna have a charcoal cloth, literally. So all you have to do is just find some way to keep the material, to control the airflow enough so that the material doesn't burn, but that it cooks instead. But
Is this how we talk the women out of shortening their skirts for a good purpose?
Exactly. We can turn charcloth is one of the easiest ways to make fire. Right? So we're talking about survival here.
I'm sorry, I have to take it in the gutter. Anyway,
so yeah.
Okay, now I feel better because I'm like we talk. It's everything. I want to make sure we covered. Charcoal's actually really easy to make. Charcloth is something that if you've got it, that's trivially easy to make too, or maybe even easier.
Yeah.
And if you use charcloth as your last layer, even or one of the layers in there, that works out pretty easily.
Yep.
And it tastes much better.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
And then you boil it. Then you boil it afterwards. Is that how you do it?
Yeah. So after you filter it, if it's available, boil the water. And I go into a couple different ways of boiling the water. Obviously, if you have a direct fire source, then in a vessel that'll survive the fire source, and you'd be surprised what can survive the fire source, right? You can put, even a cloth vessel that's holding water, you can hang that over a fire source and get it to boil as long as you're not directly in the flames, so you're not lighting the thing on fire. You can even use plastic if it comes down to it. But if you have a vessel and direct access to a flame, then boil it that way. If not, if you can make a fire, but you don't have a vessel that'll survive that, like one of the examples I use in the book is a burn bowl, which is just you take a log and you put hot rocks on it or coals on it, and it'll burn down and create a bowl out of it. Really, it takes a long time, and you got to scrape it out after you scrape out the char after each burning.
I think it's safe to assume we're not going to run out of aluminum cans anytime.
Right? Yeah, exactly. There's tons of stuff. There's tons of scavenge stuff to find that you can use to do all this stuff, right? But if you can't put that on the flame, you can do the hot rock boiling, right? So you put a bunch of rocks in the fire, let them get up really hot, take a pair of sticks to use as tongs, and transfer that into your vessel that's holding your water. And you just keep rotating hot rocks into your fire and into your water, and that'll bring the water to a boil. Right? And then you just keep rotating rocks in, and you boil the water for 10 minutes. And then you have filtered water that's also purified water. Right? And then that water is going to be safe to drink.
Yeah, really. I mean, I'm just sort of like, how would I take this to heart? I'm like, if you can find something to hold some sticks, you can make charcoal, and once you're done making the charcoal, you can grind it up, and then you can pour water through it, and you're getting there pretty couple of passes through the charcoal. Because in college, I know they're still talking about this like it's a novel thing, but we bought those water filters back in college, and we took cheap vodka and put it through it like 6 times, and it's it's pretty it's flavorless at that point and really dangerous.
It's really dangerous. Yeah. Being able to filter fluids is hugely important to survival. Being able to filter water is hugely important to survival, and charcoal makes a great filter. Right? I mean, people even use charcoal as part of their air filters and stuff like that. So it's just a great filter material. So it also it burns easier and it burns better than non-charcoal organic material, than wood, right? So if you can just learn how to make charcoal, it's going to help you out at any of these situations that you might find yourself in. It's a force multiplier in the same way that being able to make cordage is a force multiplier. Being able to make charcoal. So I definitely recommend learning the skill.
Have we missed anything?
Okay. What's that? Yeah.
Go ahead. I interrupted you because I thought you were done.
No. So the next section, I get into a little bit about what not to drink, and this, just to bring it back full circle here. This is where I talk about, don't drink your pee, don't drink blood, don't drink things like that. And the reason for that, don't drink the salt water. And the reason for that is because your body, it takes water to process the impurities out of those fluids. So you're actually creating a negative cycle by ingesting those fluids, right? Because it's going to take more. You're going to use more water to process those fluids than you're going to gain from those fluids, right? And when we start thinking about drinking your own pee, that's usually when you're already in a state of dehydration. Under normal conditions, when you're adequately hydrated, your pee is about 95% pure water and about 5% impurities, the waste that's coming out of your system, right? When you're in a state of dehydration, that can get to as much as 30% impurities, right? When your pee is really darkly yellow and stuff like that, you're looking at least 30% of that fluid being impurities that your body's going to have to process and filter back out again using water to do so. So these are really, you don't want to be using those kind of fluids. And same thing with the blood has a lot of, salts and plasmas and stuff in it that your body would have to process out if you're going to drink the blood and stuff like that. So there's things like that you just don't want to drink, and that's why you don't want to drink them. Same thing with salt water. That's the problem with salt water, is it takes your body that much more water to process all the salt out if you drink salt water. So you're actually creating a negative cycle by introducing the salt water. So those are the things you want to stay away from, and why we want to filter and process and and purify the waters that we do drink. So we're removing all of those things that our body would otherwise have to process out, or that could make us sick or compromise us. So that's what the section on what not to drink and why goes over those things. And then when I finish up the chapter with some practice, go out and look for the riparian zones that are closest by you. What plants are growing there? In my area, we get a lot of like sycamore type plants growing near water sources versus the evergreens that are growing everywhere else. Mm-hmm. So they're pretty easy to identify once you start to look, once you start developing an eye for what grows near water, right? Then you can start to see it everywhere. It goes back to it becomes part of your baseline when you're looking at any environment, right? You just start to recognize where water is by what's growing where.
We're just rarely that far from water.
No, we really are not.
And so, I mean, your primary problem, which I think you solve with digging what's the hole, when you dig the hole to let it seep.
The seepage pit, yeah.
I mean, what you do, it's like basically you're making a shallow well.
Yes,
right, and you're letting the earth you're letting the earth eliminate most of the serious problems that happen in stagnant water.
Yep.
And so you take that stuff, you take some, and I assume if you got a seepage pit, there's not a lot of heavy material in it. There probably won't be.
Yep.
You just pour this through, charcoal a couple times, and how he said, and then you boil it. I mean, there's no reason you should be out of water. It's nice to make we're going to collect water from the dew, it's nice to do that, but that takes time, and it's not exactly high concentration, right?
No. And it takes it also assumes you have the materials to do the collection, right? You have the plastic bags and stuff like that, right? I mean, so it's, again, we can go sourcing for those things, but if you know how to make a seepage pump, you don't have to spend time on any of that. Or seepage pump.
Like if you have basically a Bowie knife, a hunting knife, right? Yeah, it's pretty much that's what you need. If you got that, you're pretty good. You might want to have an axe, right? I mean, an axe after that. But if you've got basically a Bowie knife, you're pretty much safe in life.
Well, yeah, I love tools. I love technology. I want all of those things. I want to be surrounded by all those things. We as the apex adaptive generalists on this planet that have ever existed, we should never be in a position where we're forced to do something because we don't know how to acquire water from the stream that's away.
Yes.
Right. We should never be in that position, ever. Nobody should be able to force our hand by saying, I'm not going to let you have access to this bottled water.
I'm going to go back to every time we have one of these, I just realized that what we learned and took for granted in Boy Scouts, because it was like common knowledge, right? If you don't know that stuff, you're vulnerable to the world around you, right?
Yeah.
You're dependent, which is the way you say it, right? I think of it as vulnerable, but you're dependent. Yeah. And now it's like, well, I always talk about education reform, and I think of physical fitness and mindfulness are the two things that we sort of fail at. Yeah. But it's not just that. You're saying that there's a place between mindfulness and reading, writing, arithmetic that is life skills that need to be taught, and they probably need to be continually reinforced and maybe even expanded. Maybe the life skills we start out with that you and I talk about as ending up in economics and law.
Yes,
that's the beginning of life skills is basic survival analysis.
Yeah, I think if you look at it, again, just going back to Maslow's hierarchy, and just for clarity for the people watching, Maslow didn't come up with the hierarchy. He identified the elements and some of its impacts on our needs, but that hierarchy, it goes as far back as Aristotle. It goes as far back as Plato. In their forms, they were identifying and recognizing the same. You have to address the lower level person, need human, before you can transcend to the higher level person. It's a
You
consequence.
mean we're not precious snowflakes that come
No,
out
we're not precious.
full of instincts that will lead us to fulfillment in life?
We don't get to separate ourselves from, we're a natural thing that doesn't get to separate ourselves from nature without consequence.
I want to be a snowflake.
Well, you get to melt. then we get to drink you. Answering that question, why don't I destroy you and take your resources? Right? So snowflake away. but to that end, the last section of the book is practice. You need to demonstrate to yourself, to your own brain, that you're competent in this regard, that you're capable of acquiring water in order to alleviate that low trickle of anxiety that you're always at risk of being without water. Right? Once you demonstrate it to yourself, once you practice it and demonstrate it to yourself, that anxiety will never exist for you again, because you're at that point, you're capable and competent of sourcing your own water. So that is no longer a vulnerability point for you. And it's no longer a perpetual vulnerability point for you. It's no longer a dependence for you.
Is there a part where we start eating the neighbor's cows in your book? I don't think that's, I don't think that it qualifies as a basic life skill.
No, we do talk about, we get into food sourcing later on. That's another chapter. It's coming up. So,
all right. Have we covered our chapter? You want to summarize?
Just to riff off that a little bit. One of the other reasons I teach this stuff is so that you don't ever end up having to eat your neighbor. Right? I don't care if you eat at college. I don't want you to end up eating your neighbor. So, yeah. So yeah. That. Anyways, you
need a lot of ketchup, I think.
Yes. But yeah, that's why water is important. Obviously, water is important to our survival, but being able to provision water is important to our interaction.
Yes.
And that's the overriding theme throughout my whole book here, is that, yeah, these things are important. They're human skills. Our ability to do them, our competence with them, is important to our interaction as humans, not just to our survival, but to our interaction.
Right. And so you can't, you can cooperate by helping others. You know, I mean, there's just so many ways. I mean, even during this conversation, I'm thinking, what would I have thought before this conversation? Well, I wouldn't have thought that I got to walk about 30 feet to get water if I want it. I mean, and it's not like it's in short supply. Then the freaking rivers down there, that's a quarter of a mile to a river that's a mile wide, right? I mean,
right, yeah.
Well, how scary is being out of water? Not. I mean, if you keep like a 50-pound bag of rice and you know how to get to water, you're basically not going to starve.
Well, that's right? I mean, that's the weakness of dependence, though, is it robs that mind from us. It robs that awareness from us. Right. Yes. So we take it for granted, sure, but we're also dependent on it. And so we lose the knowing that we can survive even where we are. Right. Suddenly having the water turned off to my house, it becomes a threat, and it never should be a threat. You mentioned the pandemic earlier. One of the big catalysts for me turning all the stuff I was doing into a book was the pandemic hitting. Right. And I saw, people are like, we're not going to let you into the grocery store anymore if you don't get this government approved vaccine. Right. And I don't care how people feel about the vaccine. That's not the important piece here. We were seeing people in a position where they were going to be denied access to having their needs met if they didn't comply with the authority or whatever was in control of meeting those needs. Right. So that just, it was like a switch for me. It was like, it's gotten to the point now where we're no longer, as a species, at least in the West, capable of sustaining our own existence. And we're extremely vulnerable because of that. So I wrote the book because I was doing all this stuff before, trying to answer that question, trying to solve that problem. What's getting in the way of cooperation? What's undermining cooperation? Right? I mean, that's a lot of the work that we do. But the pandemic really is the one that is the thing that made me go, I have to put this together into a book and get it out there so that I can start getting this in front of people, so they can start solving this vulnerability, solving this dependence problem. So that's why we're talking about water today.
Okay, so have we covered the chapter?
We've covered the chapter.
I can't think of any trouble to make because it was too rational there at the end. So I can't start any trouble. But anyway, can we throw your book up again?
Oh, sure, yeah.
So again, it's the Primal Primer by Luke Weinhagen. It's available on where? Where is it available?
All online bookstores. It's on Amazon. It's on Barnes and Noble's bookstore. You get it hard copy, soft copy, ebook, audio book. It's all available through all the normal channels. I'm on Twitter, Luke Weinhagen. My website's corehumancompetence.com. And I teach all this material. I do classes on all this material for individuals, for organizations, all that kind of stuff, all the situational awareness stuff, all of that. It's all available. So I'm here and I want you to learn it.
Thank you, Luke. And we'll put all that information in the comments. I've been remiss a couple of times, so I want to make sure I put that down there. I usually post this sometime after we have the conversation and vaporize out of my mind like everything else and my autistic ADHD. So we'll get that in there shorter later. Luke, I really appreciate your work in this. I appreciate the work you do, not only in your profession, but as a good for the better of mankind outside of it. And I appreciate you as a friend and a fellow thought leader. Anyway, thank you very much for all you do.
Yep. Thank you as well. I appreciate you spending some time with me today. So
take care.